Okay, hello everybody. Welcome back to my podcast. This is keyboard mouse fork, and I really need to come up with a name for this podcast. I mean, so far I've just been referring to it as podcast. Also, I've moved the microphone like super close to my face, so I don't have to talk very loud. Because again, part of that like weird being nervous in front of audience that I mentioned last time, like the thought that somebody else in the house could like hear what I'm saying into my podcast makes me like feel embarrassed, which I guess is not really the best sign for this project. If like the thought of somebody listening to it embarrasses me. So yeah, welcome to my podcast. It's really nice to have you here today. This is podcast like number 3 or 2, depending on how you're counting, because the last one was a short one. But to be honest, I have no idea if this one's going to be very long or very short today, because basically, I was just out taking like a short walk and I just had this idea. And I was like, well, fuck, I should probably make a podcast about this, because this is my new favorite thing to do is just make a ton of podcasts and then, leave them as like files on my computer and then daydream about the all the yachts I'm going to buy with that sweet podcast money, because what I've always really wanted is like a yacht that's big enough to like fit a smaller yacht inside of it. And I mean, some people have like serious ambition about what they want to do with their lives, but mine, I'm a simple man, and all I want is a yacht that has another yacht inside of it. And I would give it some cool name like Anarchist, so that it's clear where my political affiliations lie. And then I would just spend all my time watching movies on the home theater of the smaller yacht inside the larger yacht. And yeah, I mean, eating sushi. Good. Well, we're off to an excellent start today. So, I'm also a little bit worried that this podcast is veering in the direction of like politics. And, I was thinking more like slice of life kind of podcast theme, but turns out that it's all I think about. So I guess it's just the thing is there's so many political podcasts out there, and I mean all those people that do them, sound so fucking smart, and some of them might even be smart, So anyway, all of that's nothing to worry about right now, because right now we're going to talk about banning people from social media, because so again, I was on a little walk today, just to clear my head in these Corona times, breathe in the wet, it's Germany, it's winter time, so it's basically just sort of a constant, misty rain thing. So, which I like, I personally, so my wife, like she can't stand it. If it's not sunny, she's depressed, and it's kind of like, well, way to be born into a country that really fits with, because she's German, of course, right? And it's like she's lived here all her life, and 2/3 of the year it's just awful outside. So, but not for me, man. Like, the rainier and the nastier, the better. Also because then you feel better staying inside. And for me, I'm like a vampire. Like if there's sun, then put me in the shade, man. It's like the first time the sun has decided to like peek out from behind the clouds in Germany in like 6 months, and everybody like runs outside and throws their bikinis on and lies in the grass, and I'm like, oh, gross, keep it away from me. Put like a jacket on and a black umbrella and sit under a tree. So yeah, anyway, maybe you feel the same way. You can leave a comment in the comment section of all right, good. All right, so yeah, how do we feel about banning groups from social media? And I think, like most things, it's a mixed bag. And it's interesting to sort of interrogate our intuitions about this, right? Because depending where you fall politically, and assuming that you're polarized to one end of the political spectrum, also assuming that, political spectrum exists in like a single dimension space with like the left over there and the right over there, right? But, depending on where you fall and assuming that you're polarized, probably, you are totally happy when the other side gets banned, but you're totally fucking annoyed when your side does, So recently, Facebook, right? I think you all know Facebook. It decided to like ban a bunch of like QAnon shit, and other sort of extremist opinions and pages and blah blah blah, and it was a little bit of a crackdown on these groups, and a bunch of the QAnon people and maybe even the hashtag got banned, and a bunch of the pages and groups got banned and shut down. And at the same time, they banned a bunch of, Antifa stuff, And I mean, Antifa is, of course, a topic all unto itself, because I'm pretty sure that Antifa was created by Trump. And not intentionally, not like he sat with a group of like shadowy, internationalists or whatever, or the opposite of that. And like, hey, let's create Antifa and like fund it and shit. Not in that sense, but in the sense that like, I mean, Antifa obviously existed before, but it was basically like a bumper sticker, which is not to like, just disparage Antifa people. Like, I mean, I think that, Antifa in Germany was doing pretty good. They would show up when the neo-Nazis would have their protests, and they would, put on counter protests, and they threw, fucking awesome parties and would raise money for various radical political causes, and maybe they would organize like a community library or an anarchist library or something, and and organize talks and speeches and, cool shit like that, and they would also, of course, like do some online doxing, find the neo-Nazis, especially ones that might be in positions of power in Germany, and then, fucking make the rest of the world aware of that fact, and I think, I applaud that. I mean, I see nothing wrong with taking a person who is in a position of authority and who also believes that, we need to, genocide, Jews, and then taking that person and being like, hey man, maybe this guy shouldn't be in a position of authority. It seems to me totally realistic and fair to do, especially if it's like initiated by a group that's already quite marginal and has little actual power, so, which is kind of actually where we're going to be going with this whole discussion altogether, but don't want to get ahead of myself. So I mean, maybe a few more words on Antifa before we return to the topic of banning on social media. Yeah, but and then suddenly, in 2016, Trump comes to power, and I don't know if it was Trump himself or somewhere in that sort of in the right wing, blogosphere, somebody was made aware of Antifa and started talking about how this group, is, they're really the vanguard of the leftist takeover of the world, essentially. And I mean, probably, the people who self-identified as Antifa were as surprised as anybody else that they had earned such an important place in world history and politics. Because, and add to this the fact that, okay, I've been in Germany a long time, and Antifa is I wouldn't say household name, but I mean, if you live in a city, then you see the Antifa stickers on the lampposts and shit. Like, you are to some degree aware of them. But in the United States, I had, prior moving to Germany, I had never heard of Antifa, and I'm fairly certain that, especially people on the right who are now, accusing Antifa of, being, again, this is the vanguard of a global conspiracy, had also never heard of Antifa, and foremost amongst these groups, probably the QAnon people. QAnon probably had never used the word Antifa until it already was used in the mainstream media to disparage, leftists, right? And which is even more evidence that QAnon is not some sort of person releasing guarded secrets to the public, but is just some dude who watches TV and then fucking blogs about it on, obscure, internet message boards. But yeah, so, but then Trump, inflated this Antifa to the level of, boogeyman number one for the right. And a lot of the left was like, well, I better Google who Antifa is. And they're like, oh, anti-fascist action. Oh, they punch Nazis. Oh, well, I guess I'm Antifa. I'm going to like fucking get a t-shirt and a tattoo and you know, and a couple stickers and stick them up and wear a mask at the protests and be like, I'm fucking Antifa, you know, and that's how it is. Cause, you know, there is no actual like organization, Antifa. I think, you know, that's, you know, I mean, at least not, you know, before Trump. Maybe now there's like underground cells of people who identify as Antifa, like planning some fucking mischief, right? I would be, you know, relatively skeptical that that's even the case now, but definitely was not the case prior to Trump. And, but yeah, I mean, who did better recruiting for, you know, a relatively obscure, you know, group? I hesitate to even call it a group than Trump by making them the bad guy number one, you know. I mean, anyway. So yeah, so in the course of Facebook banning a bunch of QAnon stuff, they also decided to go ahead and ban a bunch of anarchist and Antifa stuff, you know, and then, you know, that the idea is that, you know, we got to get rid of these radicals. So is this good or is this bad, right? I mean, radicalism can be dangerous, you know. I mean, that's not even, you know, we don't have to pretend also that the left is completely innocent. I mean, there's definitely been left-wing radical organizations, you know, especially in the 20th century, that have been more than willing to use violent methods to achieve their goals, you know, and methods not even just, you know, going after, you know, Nazis and cops, but methods of like, you know, let's bomb fucking buildings and do other, you know, fucking shenanigans that you know, are pretty hard to justify morally, you know, at least from my perspective. I mean, I guess, you know, arguments can be made, but, you know, arguments can always be made. And yeah, and so, you know, it's true that this kind of extremism, especially militant extremism, can breed you know, inclination to do violence. You know, it can also just spread simple misinformation. It can make it really hard. You know, it can really deteriorate the sort of public ability to make sense of things, you know, in the public sphere, you know, which is an effect that we see so strongly right now, right? Because, you know, I live in literally a different world from people on the right. Like the set of facts and beliefs and ideas, you know, of truth, you know, in my world, that set is different and dramatically so, you know, different from the set of beliefs and truths and facts and that make up the conservatives' world, you know. And I, of course, believe that my truths are true and that my facts are factual, and you know, I support that belief by saying, but look, obviously it's the case. You know, and not only that, but in a weird sort of ironic twist of fate, it's the mainstream media seems to confirm my view, you know, whereas the right says, yeah, but you're totally wrong. Just look out there. It's all totally different from what you say. And then they say, oh yeah, the mainstream media confirms your view. Well, that's actually confirmation of my view, because why the fuck would you decide to, oh, there's the atomic goat sheet again. But again, I'm not punishing it, so I just let it cry. But yeah, I mean, the right says, yeah, and why would you believe the mainstream media? I mean, it's, my God, you know, I mean, the fact that they seem to agree with you is more of an argument from my side than anything else. And then it's like, yeah, well, fuck, because I read Noam Chomsky's, you know, Manufacturing Consent, and I found it extremely convincing. And so, fuck you, right winger, for, you know, making me doubt. You see, except that, of course, the content of your message, you know, and it's all very easy to describe things in the abstract, which is perhaps, again, sort of what Facebook does when they decide to ban both sides. It's like, well, radicalism in its sort of abstractness, you know, you have this, you know, there's this sort of immediately intellectually appealing, but ultimately completely flawed idea of the horseshoe, you know, where the radical ends sort of reconnect, you know, again, you know, and so, you know, radical is as radical is, and so let's just sort of, you know, ban it in its entirety, and you know, I think ultimately I obviously disagree the horseshoe side of things. But I think ultimately I disagree with this move to ban stuff in general. And I think and it's hard to really put your finger on it, right? In spite of the fact that I absolutely think that this sort of polarization, not just political polarization, but this polarization of what counts as truth and fact is, extremely destabilizing socially. I look forward into the future, especially the United States, but of most, countries at the moment, and it just doesn't look very promising to me, because how will there ever be the possibility of any sort of reconciliation if the groups involved, literally, inhabit worlds that are totally opposed to one another? Yeah. And, but I think that this move to ban things, in social media is sort of dangerous in its own right, because of the great influence that social media has. And I mean, this almost, it seems like it should be the opposite, right? Because they have great influence, and they have a responsibility to go ahead and ban these organizations, in order to sort of try to, de-escalate situations that are already escalating so quickly. But I don't know if that's really the case. And I guess my greatest fear in this context is that these organizations will overstep their bounds. Yeah, that if they're successful in banning radical voices, and success measured by, fewer people holding the opinions that these radical voices, are advocating for. If there are fewer radicals, if you could somehow measure that, and maybe you can, and maybe they do, and that this seems like it's an effective technique that these social media organizations are employing. Well, then where does that stop, right? Because it seems that they could also then manipulate opinion on a grand scale about whatever the fuck they want, I mean, maybe given the social political paradigm that we live in, rather innocuously, though perhaps not so innocuously, they could, they would, marginalize voices that are critical of capitalism, for example, right? And I think, there's definitely a growing number of people who are critical of capitalism, and I think that there are absolutely excellent reasons to be critical of capitalism. And I think there's a spectrum of being critical of capitalism from, let's tear it all down, worldwide revolution, to let's make some, some reforms in the system to make it better. But I think that, a large and growing number of people exist somewhere on that spectrum. In fact, maybe even the majority of people in, wealthy democratic countries are starting to tend this direction. Yeah. And, but of course, a lot of these social media platforms are major beneficiaries from capitalism, right? And maybe, enacting a few diversity hires is not gonna really threaten their business model, or maybe even will help their business model. But ultimately, they may not be interested in certain kinds of even reforms, even small reforms to capitalism, and then use their great power of manipulating people's thoughts to make sure that those reforms, to make sure to prevent those reforms from taking place, right? And that's would be the most innocuous. I mean, we don't know how the world's going to develop in time. What if, the fascists fucking win, right? And then Facebook's like, yeah, well, any non-fascist opinion is going to be banned from our site. And then it just becomes an echo chamber for like the worst kind of fucking fascism, right? And if they have that ability, on the other hand, how do we how do you realistically stop them from having that ability? You know, I mean, I guess the state steps in, right? And at the moment, who else steps in and says, no, we want to let you, we want you to, like, you know, give a platform to fucking neo-Nazis and QAnon people and all of that. And of course, the state at the moment, you know, under Trump would definitely step in and be like, yeah, no, you should definitely let QAnon, you know, and Nazis have a platform here, but the anarchists not, right? So, you know, and maybe we should be to some degree thankful that Facebook, for all its great flaws, is like, no, we're definitely going to ban the neo-Nazis and the QAnon people, since we're all about banning now, you know. But look how dangerous it already is. They decided to not do what the president of the United States would like them to do, even if he hasn't, like, issued any explicit, you know, directives to that end. But it's pretty clear what he would want if he could choose how the platform would behave. And but in the future, that's not guaranteed. Who knows? You know, who knows? You know, I mean, yeah. So I think it's just maybe bad precedent. You know, but it's a fine and complicated line to walk, because it's easy to, you know, inadvertently fuck the world really bad, right? Because, I mean, hell, the world is not looking great, and part of the explanation for the situation that we have is this massive polarization of people, you know, especially with regards to the United States. So there's that thought, you know. But, you know, let's talk a little, you know, I've used the word a few times. Let's talk a little bit about deplatforming, right? So it's, you know, the right wing, it's one of their, like, favorite fucking talking points against the left, right? Like, oh, these fucking campus leftists are out there, like, deplatforming people who are just, look, they're good researchers. They just want to do some research. And I mean, they just have legitimate opinions, man. And shouldn't we, like, debate these opinions in, like, the marketplace of ideas and let the better one win? And the students are all like, fuck you, man. You're a bunch of racist assholes and we don't want you on our campus, right? And so first off, you know, as a sort of disclaimer, you know, as a little bit of perspective on this issue, you know, to begin with, I think that the right-wing media just blows this way out of fucking proportion, right? So, I mean, there's maybe been 10, 15 cases in the last 5, 6, 7, 10 years, you know, higher profile cases of this happening on college campuses. You know, I mean, that one lady somewhere got her hair pulled, and, like, you know, Milo Yiannopoulos, or however you say his name, got booed off stage at one point, and, you know, there's a few other things. You know, the bell curve dude was de-invited. You know, and it's like, oh fuck, you know, and every time this happens, even in a smaller, maybe, you know, instant, maybe it's like 20 leftists, you know, screaming at somebody on some college campus, you know, screaming at somebody nobody's ever heard of on a college campus that nobody has ever been in the media before, the right wing will fucking pounce, right? They'll get on top of it. They'll put it up front page news. Another example of university anti-free speech SJWs, blah, 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 right? And I think, like, come on, you know, this is happening. You know, there are thousands of fucking college campuses in the United States. There are millions of students. You know, there are hundreds of thousands of faculty and staff, and you know, and okay, yeah, an extremely tiny percent of this, you know, every once in a while, people overstep some bounds. Maybe, you know, I mean, you know, assuming that these are actually oversteps, you know, and of course, I think at least they should be judged on a case-by-case basis. You know, I mean, if you know, the people who would be, you know, especially, like, thinking about maybe, like, centrists who would be making these arguments, because, you know, and not to get too far off, you know, whatever fucking topic we're talking about right now, but a lot of this right-wing media is aimed at the centrists, right? And they try to present themselves as, like, the most, like, intellectually open and, you know, free. You know, they say, hey, this is exactly what shouldn't be happening on college campuses. College campuses should be places for open debate and blah blah blah. And centrists find that extremely convincing. You know, they say, oh, of course, like, how could these leftists, you know, who don't really know what the fuck they're doing, because I mean they're all in their early 20s and they're just like angry, purple-haired freaks. How could they? How dare they? Eliminate the possibility of debating this person. I mean, I also think this person is wrong. But how will we ever show that if we don't have the opportunity to debate them? Or maybe they're not as wrong as you think. Maybe if you actually were to listen to them, you would find that a lot of what they say makes sense and blah 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 blah. Yeah, and but these same centrists, of course, if you were like, well, I would like to invite some sort of like spiritual healing, witch doctor, celebrity, to like talk about like putting jade eggs in my vagina, and I want to like have her give like a long talk about this, or like maybe some like religious extremist faith healer person, right? They would be like, no, of course these people don't have a place on college campuses. Why you can't debate a faith healer? Like if like TPUSA were going to put on a protest to like deplatform some sort of weird faith healer that a bunch of like hippies decided to like invite, come on. I mean, the center wouldn't give a shit about that. It's because these people are ostensibly academics that the center even cares. But the point is that it's not that everybody should be allowed to talk about whatever they want at the university at any fucking time, and if that's the case, if there's no principled reason, right, then it has to be decided on a case by case basis, right? Like, just like if it was a crazy faith healer, who is, pushing snake oil onto the populace, just like that would probably be, the center would probably feel more comfortable with that person getting deplatformed at a university. So too, should we consider somebody who's actually like a racist, who's actually like, if David Duke was invited to give a talk at a university, like, are we really going to be like, oh, we shouldn't deplatform him? We should like have this, open dialogue with this literal KKK neo-Nazi, person who's going to preach hate and intolerance and try to like actively destabilize, the extremely, fucking fragile society that we've built up. And it's like, yeah, well, no, I mean, what about the guy from the bell curve, whatever Murray or whatever his name is, and I mean, maybe that was a little bit more nuanced. I mean, he was an academic. He did do research. I mean, it was deeply fucking flawed research, and then of course maybe you can have a question for deplatforming, and I'm totally off topic now. I recognize it, but I'm coming back. Just stick with me. But I mean, maybe you could also, instead of just deplatforming, you could set it up in, you could structure these talks in a certain way, and I bet that if you really talked about this with the same sort of leftists who are being accused of deplatforming people, which again, keep in mind, is this tiny little minority of people, right? A tiny group of people. But if you actually talk to them and said, okay, instead of like, we're not going to invite this guy to just come and stand up behind a fucking lectern and spout a bunch of bullshit at you, instead we're going to have like a panel of people and we're going to grill this asshole, we're going to really grill him, if he wants to come, it's up to him, right? And then maybe they'll be all right. Yeah, I'd love to see some grilling happen. I'd love to see some, bright shining stars and leftist intellectuals like really tear into this guy, and if they're not, if they're like, no, well, then that would maybe betray a little bit of fear that maybe the left can't tear into him. And I personally have a lot of fucking faith in the left. I'm pretty sure that a good leftist intellectual could just tear down somebody like Murray and his bell curve. I mean, I'm pretty sure I could, except again, it's weird, don't like to argue in front of an audience. I just get way too, excited about it, like I start shaking and I start saying real weird shit, it's like, oh, I'm so excited, like I'm talking to somebody about things that I think about all the time, and oh my god, here's 100 thoughts at the same time, so anyway, so that's what, but I think we need to, to get back on topic, on the question of deplatforming, in the context of social media. I think, you have to ask, like, who is the deplatformer here, right? Because when your deplatformer is a bunch of fucking, students, a bunch of, entitled little shits, right? Who think that, blah, 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 the world needs to be like, whitewashed clean, which is not, I mean, I'm characterizing them, on purpose. But, these students don't have any fucking power. I mean, administrations kowtow to them because, the fucking business model of the United States universities is totally fucking ridiculous, but ultimately these students don't have any power, and the universities treat them like children anyway, I mean, make no goddamn mistake. But, Facebook has power, So when students decide to deplatform something, the best that happens, or the biggest thing that happens, is the right-wing media jumps on it to try to, to make a sad attempt at generalizing all leftists according to a few of the millions of students in college campuses, right? So, but when Facebook makes a decision like that, it has measurable impacts on the lives of, hundreds of millions of people around the world, right? And again, I see that, that people would say, to quote what Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. I mean, Facebook has the power, so maybe they're responsible to sort of, to make sure that only certain voices are using their platform. But I don't know. I mean, because then you'll always have the problem: which voices are then allowed to use the platform, and who's making that decision, and maybe right now or at some time the person making the decision who gets to talk and who doesn't is somebody I would agree with, and then it's like, fine, all right, this is good for me. It's so I'm not gonna argue about it. But maybe at some point that's no longer the case, and then we've created a system whereby we've sort of delivered this power at the feet of these organizations that are not democratic, and are not really, are sort of beyond obvious methods of control. It's like, I mean, how do you make Facebook do what you want to do? I mean, what government can come along and say, hey, Facebook, I want you to behave in this way? I mean, Facebook can basically make that choice. What is the government? I mean, I'm going to block you. I mean, maybe they can deliver a credible threat, but Facebook is so big, it's hard to really imagine the kind of credible threat that a government could deliver to them, to get them to, do what they want. So these are entities that are very difficult to regulate, and they're not democratic, and we're giving them a lot of power to determine what is true and false in our society, and maybe that's dangerous, So, I mean, that's sort of my thinking, and I recognize that it's controversial, and also, of course, it's not that my answer is the best answer. It's I mean, I definitely see that there is a lot of potential for abuse in my answer. Just like letting it, flinging open the doors to any of the wildest fucking thinking that you can get, But hey, man, some of those anarchist sites that they banned, anarchist groups that they banned, they were really not that bad, I mean, like CrimeThink is like old school, man. CrimeThink's got a lot of good stuff on it, and sure, they're, I mean, I don't know if CrimeThink specifically advocates for like violence and stuff, but there's kind of a thread in the far left about worldwide revolution, and take it maybe with a little bit of a grain of salt, Drinking my water there, but I mean, I should probably talk a little bit about violence, and and is violence acceptable, and I mean, I personally am against violence, as a political tool. Like, I don't think that I'm going to use it, and I don't think that you should go out and start burning shit down, like don't do that, like I definitely am not telling you to go and do that. But I think it's also important to keep in mind that, democracy developed as a credible threat, right? Like, the reason why the world, or places that became more democratic, initially, was because people who had been marginalized, which at the time in Europe was most people, said, hey man, if you don't give us some degree of, determination in politics, society, what have you, then we're gonna burn down your fucking palace and cut your fucking head off. And as far as the holders of power, the nobility and the elites, insofar as they did not believe those people, they refused to democratize. And it wasn't until there were widespread revolts and even beheadings that nobility in Europe said, okay, here are some democratic concessions, and they made democratic concessions. And the history of greater democracy has always been a history of, a credible threat being delivered. Yeah. And I think, as we see now, democracy is being slowly eroded, especially in the United States. But I think in most ostensibly democratic countries, you're seeing some degree of democratic erosion over time as elites and experts, take a greater amount of control. Not to say that experts, can't govern well, because they can. They're fucking experts. They've devoted their lives to understanding issues, but that doesn't mean that they're automatically good at governance, right? So again, it's never really automatic, right? So, but as we see this erosion, we also see an accumulation of violence and power on behalf of the state. There's which is the power of protest, right? Because a lot of people, especially friends of mine in the center, often say that, yeah, but what does protest really do? Ultimately, the decisions are made, in the hallowed halls of government offices somewhere in Washington, D.C. or Berlin, right? It's not, decisions aren't made in the protest on the street. Yeah. And oftentimes I hear people on the left and who are sympathetic towards protests saying, yeah, but this is a demonstration of the outpouring of the democratic will, right? Like, this is people showing that this is something that's important to them, and in this way, simply it's a matter of informing politicians, right? That by doing these demonstrations, we've simply informed them that this is something that people are passionate enough about to get out on the street and protest, or even throw some Molotovs and burn some Mercedes Benz or whatever, loot a grocery store, So, and I think that yes, to a degree, that informing politicians, a lot of them have probably their own echo chambers that are informed by a bunch of lobbyists. The lobbyists saying, hey man, if you want more voters, how about you put Coca-Cola in all of your White House addresses. We can just always have a bottle of Coca-Cola, whenever anybody's giving a speech on the floor of the Senate or whatever, we'll just make sure that we get some good advertising in there, and you'll definitely get more voters that way. And the politicians are like, yeah, well, I live in this fucking little bubble that's way up on the inside of my own ass, so probably whatever this lobbyist is telling me is true. And then somebody has a protest outside, like, we don't like Coca-Cola, and the lobbyists are like, wait a second, Coca-Cola lied to me? Like, you mean I might not get more voters if I fucking constantly plug Coca-Cola and all the things that I do? So there's probably some level of information, being delivered via protest, but a part of it is also like, hey, oh shit, if the protest gets big enough, then, social stability is threatened, then the system we've built, and we being, this political elite that has actively tried to build a system that is very favorable to the political elite and other elites in society. This system we've built is threatened. Perhaps it's time to, make more democratic concessions. We need to appease the people, because it's either appease or let's go full throttle fascism, which might very well be the case. Adorno was famous for saying, hey, capitalism leads inevitably to fascism. And I think a lot of people for most of this last century would have been like, yeah, fucking crazy leftist, right? Like, what is he talking about? Look at how bad the Soviets are. So we don't need to listen to somebody like Adorno. And then it's like, oh, wait, Trump, there is an echo of fascism there, right? I know that a lot of people get really annoyed when the left calls Trump fascist, but and I'm not gonna call him fascist. Not doing it. I'm going to say he's like fascist adjacent. You know, he's like proto-fascist. You know, he's like an echo of fascist, a reminder of fascism. You know, he's similar to fascism. You know, he's not full blown, you know, Hitler or Mussolini level fascism up in here, you know, but he's definitely like a step in that direction, right? And maybe it's like, oh, you know, maybe that should be a little bit of a wake-up call that thinkers like Adorno, maybe not 100% accurate in everything they said, but maybe a grain of truth in there, maybe something to be aware of, to you know, a call for greater vigilance in our society, you know, and also you know, similarly, you know, a call to remember that, you know, if the shit hits the fan, you know, democracy is delivered to the people, because the people who have the power to deliver democracy are afraid that those other people, the ones they're delivering democracy to, might cut their fucking heads off, you know. I mean, look at how Gandhi has been like weaponized by the elite, right? Because Gandhi is a famous figure for his nonviolence approach, and it fucking worked, and it was fucking amazing. And you know, and I definitely would never, you know, diminish Gandhi's accomplishment or diminish the power of nonviolence in these contexts, right? But Gandhi also created this expectation that has been, you know, abused by elites, whereby any use of violence automatically, you know, deserves exclusion, right? So if you know, if you know, the elites say, okay, here's the table and here are the seats, and we're gonna give a seat to you know, you can have a seat at the table, but if you ever use a little bit of violence, then then you're no longer, you know, we don't negotiate with terrorists. You know, I mean, that's maybe an extreme way to put it, but we're not going to give you a seat at the table because, you know, you've shown yourself to be violent, and you should be more like Gandhi and more like Martin Luther King, and that's sort of the criteria by which we judge acceptability. And if you don't, you know, if you use violence, then we're not gonna talk to you, and we're not gonna take your claim seriously, right? Which is a fucking big problem, you know, when the elites are when the people who have the power to say who gets what seat are also the ones that are you know, are making the rules about you know, how to you know, apportion these seats, right? Because then the elites, all they would have to do is send a couple fucking agent provocateurs into any of these movements to do a little bit of violence and be like, hey man, we were about to give you a seat at the table, but then, you know, you burned down that bank the other day, and so now you're just a fucking terrorist, and we're not going to listen to what you're saying anymore. In fact, we're going to try our best to arrest your entire organization, whatever it may be, you know. And then and you know, and I mean, maybe you're thinking, no, but the government would never do something like that. To which I would answer, like, why the fuck not? You know, I mean, first off, I'm pretty sure the government is doing that, you know. I mean, I don't have any hardcore evidence to show you, you know, but I mean, you know, we need the evidence, you know. but you know, I mean, if it's like really easy to imagine, then, you know, I mean, maybe it's an argument for the truth of it. You know, I mean, compare that to a lot of the really popular conspiracy theories, right? Just to show, sort of differentiate myself from these conspiracy theories, right? Like 5G is somehow giving people coronavirus, right? Like that's a stretch, right? Like it's a little bit hard to imagine how that would be the case, you know? However, you know, police putting a couple infiltrators in a protest movement to cause some disruptions in order to legitimize cracking down on that protest, that's not much of a stretch. It's like, it seems like a pretty obvious thing. Like if you were police and you were sitting around, you're like, hey man, you know, this protest is getting out of hand. You know, so far it's been peaceful. We don't have any fucking legal reason to stop it, but, you know, like, you know, we really don't like it. You know, what can we do? You know, we need to discredit this. I mean, my God, these people are saying defund the police. If this opinion spreads, we might lose our funding. And the police say, I have an idea. Why don't we like go send some of our boys in there with masks on and you know, have them break some fucking windows, and we can go in and fucking, you know, break up the protest and arrest a bunch of people. It happens all the fucking time, you know. I mean, in Germany, they have a protest. They have a rule in a protest that protesters aren't allowed to cover their faces, right? Even though police always cover their faces, right? but protesters aren't allowed to do it. And as soon as the police see some protesters with covered faces, they say, they'll announce to the protest, we see some people with covered faces. We're now declaring that this protest is illegal. Get ready to be sprayed by our water cannons, which happens at nearly every protest in Germany. And I mean, that's how it always happens, right? And I think that generally speaking, it is indeed leftists who are covering their faces. And then, and they're doing it also to provoke this response from the police. But, I mean, how easy would it be for the police to be like, yeah, we're just going to send in a couple undercovers to fucking cover their faces, and then we can declare any protest that we want illegal whenever we want. And, of course, keep in mind that when protests, escalate, then the police, are able to take that to the government and say, hey, man, this protest escalated. We therefore need more things like water cannons and riot gears and the various non-lethal or lethal weapons that we use to put down these protests. And we essentially need more money to do it. So follow the money a little bit there. So anyway, this has been a little bit all over the place so far. But yeah, oh yeah. So the sort of the weaponization of the idea of nonviolent protest. I think nonviolent protest is an extremely important tactic. It should be used. I think it should be the majority of the methodology that the people use to get what they want. I think nonviolent protest is awesome. It can have a great deal of effect. It allows you to claim the moral high ground, which is a very powerful claim to make and should not be underestimated. But I also think that in certain contexts, when push comes to shove, violence is not, without some merit, to put it rather diplomatically, and of course the context is going to play a large part in this. I mean, Gandhi was successful because in the end, the British decided not to all out slaughter the Indian people, right? Now, however, if they had made a different decision, if they said, oh, okay, well, how about this then? If you're going to non-violently resist colonial rule, we've decided that we want to keep the colony, and we're going to just slaughter you now. We're going to just, execute a program of extermination against the Indian people, right? And if that had taken place, then it maybe would have been a little bit less effective to pursue nonviolence, right? Because it's like, oh, well, then I guess we just let all of our people be exterminated. But we have the moral high ground, right? So, I mean, in a sense, Gandhi got lucky that the British Empire did not undertake that method. And I think that was also due to a lot of historical circumstances. I think in a different time, in a different place, the British would have made a different decision. So it's something to keep in mind. I think we need to be strategic to a degree about these sorts of things. And yeah. But that being said, I also don't think that we need to buy a bunch of guns and start shooting fucking, the fucking cops and stuff. That's absolutely not, where we are, and there is still a shred of democracy, and I think we should pursue that. We should try to widen that shred of democracy. Before we undertake it anyway. So, I'm totally rambling, but mostly I'm just thinking, fuck, my mom is going to really be angry at me for this, for this podcast, can I even put it online and sort of, risk the wrath of my mother? She's definitely not a proponent of violence in any means, and, I mean, I don't know, I just feel like I really want to emphasize that I'm not a proponent I'm not advocating violence. I'm not saying go be violent now because that's going to help democracy. I mean, that's definitely not the case. Random acts of violence will not make anything more democratic, and even a program of organized violence could easily, backfire. If a small group of people decide to take it upon themselves to do violence like fucking terrorists, well, there's no reason to expect that won't lead to more fascism at the moment. If the masses rise up in revolt, against the powerful elite, in mass, spontaneously, and storm the gates with torches and pitchforks and say, enough of this, we don't want the Electoral College anymore. We want direct democracy. We want democratic reforms to the Constitution of the United States. Then maybe that would be effective. But a small group of Antifa terrorists would just be a small group of Antifa terrorists, and it would be like, and then President Biden would be all like, well, we're gonna crack down on Antifa, and then the government does what the government loves to do the most for some fucking reason, which is crack down on the left, because no matter how bad the right is, the government always loves a good crackdown on the left, right? So something to keep in mind. So yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, again, I really feel like that was we really covered everything in this episode. I think this is a full episode. I guess this is like officially episode 2, the last one being episode 1.5. And I propped up my microphone on like a box, because the last few times I noticed that I was like leaning down really close to it, and it was giving me some weird like neck pain, but like in the front of my neck. Which is like kind of a weird place to get neck pain. Like usually you would imagine neck pain coming from like the back of your neck, but I even though I propped it up and I really don't have to lean forward, I'm still getting a weird like frontal neck pain, right? Like I don't know, maybe I'm like really whispering and I'm like putting a bunch of strain on my vocal cords, because I'm so worried that like somebody will hear me. I probably should get like a fucking soundproof room. So like support my Patreon so I can afford a soundproof room, so I can not have frontal neck pain, and I can continue to make podcasts, maybe even talk a little bit louder without being embarrassed that somebody's listening to me. Because I think that's every podcaster's greatest fear, is that somebody's actually listening. Also, a soundproof room would help with the background noise, like the sirens and other people moving around in the house, because the house is made out of wood and it likes to creak, which I like. I love a creaky house, except like at 4 a.m. when I'm trying to go to the bathroom and I don't want to wake anybody up. A good friend of mine, he would always call me like a mouse, because I don't like to make any noise, but I much prefer ninja. So I'm like a fucking ninja. I don't like to make any fucking noise. I like to really sneak around and blend into the shadows and stuff. Stealth kill, bah, against the government. But, no. Again, yeah. So anyway, thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. So this is like the third one I've recorded. So take that, Andrew Mazer, who only has one podcast so far, and, anyway, that was a plug for Bad Hair and the Beltway Babes. They're great. They inspired me to make this podcast. They have something like 20 listeners so far on YouTube, so you should go and check them out and give them a like. Tell them that I sent you. My name is Toothpick Tamagotchi. Yeah, Toothpick Tamagotchi. Okay, I guess we're finished. I just saying goodbye is just, it's like the hardest thing. I just kind of like I feel so good talking to you. It's like letting it all off my chest. A bunch of people just out there listening to everything I say and being like, wow, this guy totally knows what he's talking about. I agree with what he's saying. And finally, So yeah, I'm gonna go back. I'm gonna recede back into the depths of the internet now, after having poked my head up for this time. And if you're looking for me, you can find me on the internet, Patreon, YouTube, Spotify. I have no idea where I'm going to be. Still haven't done any of that. But I will. This is just the backlog. I'm just preparing all of this so that I can release regular podcasts when I finally start releasing them. So this is the tricks of the trade. I don't know. I don't think oftentimes you don't really get the curtain pulled back, and that's what I'm doing for you. I'm pulling back the curtain behind the podcast process, so that you can appreciate the sort of all of the the internal, workings that go into making one of these things possible. I'd like to thank my crew, which is this cardboard box here in front of me, and this microphone that I bought on the internet, and my monitor and this little blue line that sort of moves whenever I talk into it, and so thank you very much, and have a nice day. Goodbye.